So you wanna be a picture book writer, then you gotta write picture books. And you're gonna need a bucket load of bright ideas for titles, plots, and hooks. If you're partial to prose or you're raring to rhyme, then repeat after me. It's a challenge, but I'm gonna tackle each story 1 month at a time with 12 by 12.
And I've titled it, Advocacy is Not a Four-Letter Word. The word advocate comes from the Latin root advocare, which literally means to add a voice in support of. We often think of the word often within the activist framework. We often think of it in terms of like someone like really speaking out and holding strong, maybe being louder than normal. I want us to think about this in the context of this webinar, in the context of our careers as writers, as really thinking about it of adding a voice of support. And how can that play out in your writing career? Well, that can play out in many, many different ways. And I also want to think about reframing that word, because oftentimes when we think about advocating for ourselves, we worry about being difficult, like that we're being difficult in some way, that we're being ungrateful in some way when we like raise a concern or ask a question. And I want us to think about reframing that word advocate or advocacy as something not being about being difficult, but really about how we can be more proactive. Like when you're advocating for yourself, you're being proactive about something that you need. Like, I'm not feeling this, or can I ask a question? Fighting for yourself, adding your voice in support. Because your book baby is important to you. And so it's important to ask those questions and make requests and figure out how you want to shepherd your own career. And I just want to say that in this webinar that I'm sharing with you, I'm really sharing with you my personal journey, from which I hope you do have some takeaways. There's no one size that fits, everyone. There's no one size for advocacy that fits everyone, what to do, when to do it, how to do it. I really think it's about a state of mind, being open to raising your voice in support of your work, your writing. And so I hope that that's how you'll see it as I share my journey in figuring out a way to advocate for myself, that you'll see yourself, or that'll resonate for you in ways. And you'll see how you might advocate for yourself if you're not already doing so, because many of you may already be doing this. Okay, so how to ask for what you and your stories want, need, deserve in the different stages of your writing career. And that kind of brings us here to why I'm doing a webinar on this topic. And I mentioned it briefly, but diving into the world of children's publishing was scary. When I first decided that maybe this is what I wanted to do, there were a few times, and I can literally count on the fingers of one hand, from when I first wrote that story 18 years ago from today to 2018, when I, decided I would really enter the world of writing. There were just a few times when I would like Google, I would like try to figure out how to get a story published, but I would get really overwhelmed. I didn't have 12 by 12. That didn't exist at that point. And I would just put the idea of it away because it was just too overwhelming. It felt opaque. There were a lot of gatekeepers. I didn't know who to ask. I would like put feelers out to like somebody who had published a book, and I'd be like, oh, can you let me know how to do this? Or can I talk to your publisher? And I didn't understand the processes. And it was almost like I was waiting for someone to like, here, I'll publish your book for you, which is absolutely not the way it gets done, as I now know. But anyway, I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I did not even realize that, no one was going to come to me and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to publish that book for you. Like I had to make it happen. But I didn't know that at the time. So anyway, as I present my journey to learning about how to advocate for myself, I hope that you also walk away with like, oh, well, maybe these are the different ways that one can advocate for oneself in the different stages of my career, because it's not the same depending on where you are. And that most importantly, you don't think of it as a four-letter word. because literally it's not, but sometimes we think of it as that. But there were a few things that happened at the stage that were turning points for me. And this is why I'm sharing this with you, because this is how I became a writer. One, I did a professional development event at my school. The school was running it. That was one of the first things that helped me to set me on this path of owning my identity as a writer. I was working with a partner from a high school, another colleague, and we had to state personal goal and a professional goal, and they had given us parameters for how to envision it and lay out our plans for meeting that goal. And it involves actually getting up and physically moving around and doing all these really cool things, which I think was really helpful for me, because that was a moment as I was getting up and walking with my partner, and we were like figuring out, how we were going to talk about our personal and professional goals. That was a moment for the first time that I said out loud to someone else who was not my husband that I wanted to get this story published, that story that I had written when my daughter was in 4th grade. And I said it out loud. And when I said it out loud and I laid out the vision for how to get to that end goal, I made my intention so loud and clear, and I put it out into the universe. And that helped to ground me in seeing that I was now acknowledging that this was a possibility for my future, that I was stating this as a possibility for my future. I was naming it and I was claiming it and I was voicing it for myself. And that was a really huge, important step in pushing me to the next step, which was to then sign up for a Highlights Foundation retreat, again, paid for by my school, by my school, again, ironic. And there, a year later, this was a year later, so it took me that year to figure out, okay, who do I go to? How do I go? I had contacted an author to look at my manuscript. I had begun to take steps towards figuring out what it meant to be a writer. I went to the Highlights Foundation retreat amongst all these new and established writers, listening to amazing faculty. And I clearly remember the moment when I was listening to Sandra Neil Wallace talk. She was my mentor. She's amazing, a wonderful author and human being. And I was looking around at all of these people, and I thought to myself for the first time, I think I might be a writer. That was a huge moment for me. I named it, and that's what advocacy looked like at the stage. I stated my intention out loud, which was huge. I laid out a vision for what needed to happen if I wanted to get that nonfiction story published. That was huge. I honored my desire to tell stories. I started seeing myself not just as a teacher, but also as someone who was a writer. And I called myself a writer out loud, which was huge. That's what advocacy looked like at this stage.
Month at a time with 12 by 12.